The morning I looked out my kitchen window and saw someone yanking the heavy-duty tarp off my firewood stack. I thought maybe a neighbor was playing a prank. Then I recognized the blonde bob haircut and white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway, and my blood pressure spiked. It was Deborah Harrington, president of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association in Boulder Creek, Colorado, and she was rolling up my brand new $200 weatherproof tarp like she owned it. I grabbed my phone and headed outside, my bare feet hitting the cold concrete of my driveway. It was early November, and frost still covered the grass in patches where the morning sun hadn't reached yet. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching her. "That's my property you're taking." Deborah turned around, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raised in that condescending way she had perfected over her 3 years as HOA president. She was wearing yoga pants and a puffy vest over a designer sweater, looking like she had just stepped out of a country club catalog. "Fletcher Jennings," she said, emphasizing each syllable of my name like she was scolding a child. "This tarp is in direct violation of Code 17B of our community standards. Visible tarps must be neutral earth tones. This is blue." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if she was joking. My firewood was stacked against the back corner of my property, barely visible from the street and certainly not an eyesore. "It's navy blue," I said slowly. "That's a dark neutral color, and it's on my property, not affecting anyone. The rules clearly state earth tones." "Blue is not an earth tone, Fletcher. I've already documented this violation with photographs, and you've received 2 written warnings." That was news to me. I never received any warnings. "They were sent to your email address on file," she said primly, continuing to roll up my tarp. "Then resend them because I never got them, and put my tarp back. That wood needs to stay dry." Deborah's expression hardened. She tucked the bundled tarp under her arm. "This tarp is being confiscated as per our enforcement procedures. You can retrieve it from my office once you've purchased an appropriate replacement and provided photographic evidence of compliance. There will also be a $50 confiscation fee." I stepped closer, my jaw tight. "You're not taking my property. Put it back, or I'm calling the police." "Call them," Deborah said with a dismissive wave. "The HOA has legal authority to enforce community standards. You signed the covenant when you purchased this home. Perhaps you should have read it more carefully." She turned and walked toward her Lexus, my tarp still under her arm. I followed, phone in hand. "I'm serious, Deborah, that's theft. Return my property right now." She opened her rear hatch and tossed the tarp inside. "It's not theft, it's enforcement. You'll get it back when you comply. Good day, Fletcher." I snapped several photos of her with the tarp in her vehicle, making sure the license plate was visible. Deborah noticed and actually laughed. "Document all you want. The covenant is on my side." She slammed the hatch closed and walked to her driver's door. As she drove away, I stood in my driveway, shaking with anger. I had lived in this neighborhood for 2 years, and Deborah had been a constant thorn in my side. She had cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street 30 minutes before the designated time, for parking my truck in my own driveway facing the wrong direction, and for having a garden gnome that was apparently not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the community. But this was different. This was actual theft of my personal property. I went inside and immediately started researching Colorado property laws and HOA enforcement limits. What I found was interesting. While HOAs had significant power to fine homeowners for violations, they absolutely could not confiscate personal property without a court order. What Deborah had just done was straight-up theft, covenant or no covenant. I called the Boulder Creek Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher listened patiently, and said an officer would come by to take a report. Officer Marcus Chen arrived about 45 minutes later. He was a young guy, probably early 30s, with a professional demeanor. I showed him the photos I had taken and explained what happened. "So she just took your tarp without your permission?" he asked, making notes. "That's right. She claimed it was an HOA violation and that she had the authority to confiscate it." Officer Chen shook his head. "HOAs can impose fines, they can take you to court, but they can't take your property. That's theft." "Did she say where she was taking it?" "She said I could retrieve it from her office, which I assume is her house." "She runs the HOA from her home." He nodded. "I'll go speak with her. Can you email me those photos?" I did, and Officer Chen left. I went back inside to work. I ran a small IT consulting business from home and had client calls scheduled for the afternoon. But I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about Deborah's smug expression as she drove away with my tarp. About an hour later, my doorbell rang. It was Officer Chen, and he was holding my folded tarp. "Got your property back," he said, handing it to me. Mrs. Harrington was not pleased, but I explained that confiscating personal property without a court order constitutes theft. I strongly suggested she return it to avoid charges. "Thank you, officer. I really appreciate it." "No problem. I also want you to know that I advised Mrs. Harrington that if she believes you're in violation of HOA rules, her proper recourse is to fine you or take civil action, not to take your belongings. If she attempts this again, call us immediately and we'll file charges." After he left, I felt vindicated but also worried. Deborah wasn't the type to let something like this go. She would retaliate somehow. I was right. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a notice of a $500 fine for interfering with HOA enforcement procedures and making false police reports. There was also a separate $200 fine for the TARP violation. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Patricia Flores. I had worked with her when I bought the house, and she had warned me about the HOA being aggressive. "Fletcher, good to hear from you," she said warmly. "What's going on?" I explained the entire situation, from Deborah taking the tarp to the new fines. Patricia sighed. "The fines are bogus. Calling the police isn't interference, it's exercising your rights. And the tarp fine is questionable at best. Navy blue could reasonably be considered a dark neutral. But here's the thing, fighting HOA fines is expensive and time-consuming. So what do I do? Document everything. Don't pay the fines yet. Write a detailed letter disputing them and request a hearing with the HOA board. They're required to give you one. If they deny your appeal, then we can discuss further legal action. But Fletcher, there's something else you should know." "What?" "I've represented 3 other homeowners in Pinewood Grove in the last year. All had issues with Deborah Harrington. One case got particularly ugly. She was fining this elderly woman for having brown grass during a drought. The woman ended up selling her house just to get away from the harassment." "That's insane." "It is. But it's also common with aggressive HOA presidents. They often have unchecked power because most homeowners don't want to deal with the hassle of challenging them." After we hung up, I sat down and wrote a detailed letter disputing the fines. I included the photos of Deborah taking my tarp, a copy of Officer Chen's report number, and a detailed argument about why navy blue could be considered an earth tone, complete with color theory references and examples from paint companies' earth tone palettes. I sent the letter via certified mail and email. 2 weeks passed with no response. My firewood stayed dry under the navy blue tarp. I half expected Deborah to show up again, but she didn't. Then one morning I discovered why she had been quiet. I walked outside to get my newspaper and found a bright orange sticker on my front door. It was from the County Code Enforcement Office, stating that there had been a complaint about unpermitted structures on my property, and that an inspector would be visiting within 5 business days. My stomach dropped. I didn't have any unpermitted structures, unless someone was counting my firewood stack or the small garden shed I had installed last spring. I had checked before buying the shed. It was under the square footage that required a permit. I called the Code Enforcement Office and spoke with Inspector Raymond Walsh. He was professional and explained that they had received an anonymous complaint about multiple violations, including the shed, firewood storage, and something about landscaping. These complaints are almost always from HOA disputes, he said, sounding tired. But we have to investigate every complaint we receive. I'll be out Thursday morning around 10. Just have any documentation you have about your shed ready. Thursday morning, Inspector Walsh arrived right on time. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he had been doing this job for a long time. I showed him the shed first. He measured it, checked the manufacturer's specifications, and nodded. This is fine. It's well under the size that requires a permit. Who said this needed a permit? I don't know. The complaint was anonymous. He made some notes. Let me see this firewood stack. We walked to the back corner of my property. My firewood was neatly stacked, covered with the navy blue tarp, and clearly not a fire hazard or eyesore. This is a firewood stack, Inspector Walsh said flatly. There's nothing to cite here. It's not a structure, it's not a hazard, it's just wood. Can I ask you something? I said. How often do you get complaints from this neighborhood? He looked at me for a long moment. Off the record. Sure. We get more calls from Pinewood Grove than any other HOA in Boulder Creek. 90% of them come from the same address. We've investigated that homeowner for filing false complaints before, but unless we can prove malicious intent, there's not much we can do. Let me guess. Deborah Harrington. He didn't confirm, but his expression said everything. After Inspector Walsh left, clearing me of all alleged violations, I was done playing defense. It was time to learn more about Deborah and the HOA. I started by reviewing all the HOA documents from when I purchased my house. The covenant, bylaws, and board meeting minutes were all available to homeowners. I had never bothered to read them carefully before, but now I went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. What I discovered was fascinating. According to the bylaws, the HOA board was supposed to consist of 5 members, elected by the homeowners. The board met quarterly, and all meetings were supposed to be announced to residents at least 2 weeks in advance. Financial reports were supposed to be distributed annually. I had lived here for 2 years and had never received notice of a single meeting or a single financial report. I had never even been informed that I could vote for board members. I dug deeper into my email archives and found the original HOA documents from my home purchase. There was a list of board members from 2 years ago. Deborah had been president, but there were 4 other names I didn't recognize. I decided to do some investigating. The HOA collected dues from everyone in the neighborhood, $200 per quarter. There were 63 homes in Pinewood Grove. That meant the HOA should be collecting over $50,000 a year. Where was that money going? I started by talking to my neighbors. First, I visited Tom Richards, who lived 3 houses down. He was a retired engineer who had lived in the neighborhood for 8 years. Tom, can I ask you something about the HOA? I said when he answered his door. You mean Deborah's personal fiefdom, he said with a bitter laugh. Come on in. Over coffee, Tom explained that when he first moved in, the HOA had been fairly reasonable. There was an active board that maintained common areas and organized neighborhood events. Then about 4 years ago, Deborah got elected president, Tom said. Within a year, the other board members all resigned. Some moved away, some just quit. Deborah claimed she was looking for replacements, but she never held elections. She just started running everything herself. That's not legal, is it? Probably not, but who's going to challenge her? She's got the covenant memorized and weaponizes it against anyone who crosses her. I got fined $300 once for painting my front door red. Said it wasn't an approved color. Had to repaint it beige. What about the HOA funds? Do you ever see financial reports? Tom shook his head. Never. I asked once at a meeting. She said the finances were in order and that was that. Haven't been to a meeting since. She stopped announcing them a couple years ago anyway. I visited 4 other neighbors that day and heard similar stories. Everyone had been fined for something. Everyone was frustrated, but nobody wanted to challenge Deborah because it seemed like too much hassle. That evening, I sat down and did the math. Over 4 years, Deborah had collected over $200,000 in HOA dues. The neighborhood had no common areas beyond a small entrance sign. No pool, no clubhouse, nothing that required significant maintenance. The entrance sign had landscaping around it, but that couldn't cost more than a few thousand a year. Where was the rest of the money? I decided to formally request the HOA financial records. According to Colorado law, homeowners have a right to inspect HOA books and records. I sent Deborah an email requesting copies of all financial statements, bank records, and expense reports for the past 4 years. Her response came 2 hours later. Fletcher, financial records are available for review by board members only. As a general homeowner, you are not entitled to this information. If you have concerns about HOA management, you may submit them in writing to the board for consideration. I forwarded her email to Patricia, my attorney. She called me immediately. This is completely wrong. Colorado law is explicit about homeowner rights to financial records. She has to provide them within 30 days of a written request. So what do I do? Send her a formal demand letter. I'll draft it for you. If she doesn't comply, we can file a complaint with the state. This is actually a pretty serious violation if she's refusing access to financial records. Patricia sent me the demand letter, and I sent it to Deborah via certified mail and email. The letter cited the specific Colorado statute requiring HOA financial transparency and gave her 20 days to provide the records. Deborah's response was to fine me $500 for harassment of board members. That was her mistake. With Patricia's help, I filed a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs in the state. I included all documentation: the confiscation of my Tarp, the bogus fines, the false code enforcement complaints, and the refusal to provide financial records. The Division of Real Estate took the complaint seriously. Within 2 weeks, I received a letter saying they were opening an investigation into the Pinewood Grove HOA. Deborah showed up at my house the day after she received notice of the investigation. I saw her marching up my driveway and met her at the door. She was furious. "You had no right to file that complaint," she said, her voice shaking. "The HOA is in perfect compliance with all regulations." "Then you should have no problem with the investigation," I said calmly. "I just want to see where our dues are going. That's my right as a homeowner. You're trying to destroy this community. Everything I've done is to maintain property values and standards. By stealing my Tarp, by filing false code enforcement complaints, by refusing to provide financial records." Her face was red now. "Get off your high horse, Fletcher. You think you're better than everyone else, that the rules don't apply to you. Well, they do. And when this investigation is over and the state finds nothing wrong, you're going to owe the HOA for the legal fees we'll incur defending against your frivolous complaint. We'll see, I said and closed the door. Over the next month, the investigation proceeded. An investigator from the Division of Real Estate interviewed multiple homeowners in the neighborhood. Word spread quickly about what was happening, and people started coming forward with their own complaints about Deborah. I learned that she had fined one family $3,000 over 2 years for various minor violations. Another homeowner had been threatened with a lien on their property for unpaid fines related to a basketball hoop in their driveway. Then the investigator requested the HOA's financial records directly from the bank. That's when things got interesting. I received a call from investigator Susan Martinez. "Mr. Jennings, I need to ask you some questions about the HOA's finances. I don't know anything about them. Deborah refused to share them with me. I understand, but you're the one who filed the complaint, so I wanted to keep you informed. We've obtained the bank records and there are some significant discrepancies. The HOA account should have substantial reserves based on the dues collected, but the balance is less than $5,000. Where did the money go? That's what we're trying to determine. There are numerous transfers to what appear to be personal accounts, payments to vendors that we can't verify, and cash withdrawals. We're expanding the investigation and will likely refer this to law enforcement." My heart was racing. "You're saying Deborah stole HOA funds?" "I'm saying there are irregularities that need further investigation. I'll keep you updated." 2 weeks later, I came home from a client meeting to find multiple police cars in front of Deborah's house. Neighbors were standing in their yards watching. I parked and walked over to where Tom Richards was standing. "What's going on?" I asked. "Cops showed up about an hour ago with a warrant," Tom said, his eyes wide. "They've been carrying boxes out of her house." As we watched, 2 officers emerged from Deborah's front door with cardboard boxes full of files and what looked like computer equipment. Deborah followed them out, talking rapidly, her voice carrying across the street. "This is outrageous. I've done nothing wrong. Those are private documents." One of the officers said something to her calmly and she stopped, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then I saw him. Sheriff's Deputy Frank Morrison, who I recognized from a community safety meeting I had attended last year. He was carrying a rolled-up tarp, my tarp. The navy blue one Deborah had confiscated, but that didn't make sense. Officer Chen had returned my tarp, unless Deborah had taken it again. I felt a surge of anger and started walking toward Deborah's house. Tom grabbed my arm. "Don't," he said. "Let the cops handle it." But I was already crossing the street. Deputy Morrison saw me approaching and held up a hand. "Sir, please stay back. This is an active investigation." "That's my tarp," I said, pointing. "She stole it from my property. Again." Deputy Morrison looked at the tarp in his hand, then at me. "This is yours." "Yes. She confiscated it weeks ago for an HOA violation. A police officer made her return it, but she must have taken it again." Deborah spun around, her face pale. "He's lying. That tarp was on his property in violation of community standards. I had every right to enforce the rules." "Madam, we've been through this," Deputy Morrison said patiently. "You don't have the right to take someone's property. That's theft." "It's not theft, it's enforcement." Deputy Morrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge wallet, flipping it open to show his credentials. "Madam, I'm with the Sheriff's Department Economic Crimes Unit. We're investigating allegations of embezzlement and fraud related to your management of the Homeowners Association. Taking this tarp, if it happened as Mr. Jennings describes, is the least of your problems right now." Deborah's face went from red to white in an instant. She stared at the sheriff's department seal on Deputy Morrison's badge, and I watched her entire body language change. Her shoulders sagged, her arms dropped to her sides, and she seemed to shrink. "I want a lawyer," she whispered. "That's your right," Deputy Morrison said. He turned to me. "Mr. Jennings, is this your tarp?" I looked at it closely. It was definitely navy blue and the same brand as mine. "It looks like mine, but I'd have to check to be sure. My tarp should still be on my firewood." "Let's go check," he said. We walked back to my house and I led him to the backyard. My firewood was there, but the tarp was gone. The wood was exposed and some of the top pieces were damp from rain we had gotten the night before. "She took it again," I said, feeling a mix of vindication and frustration. "Unbelievable." Deputy Morrison nodded. "I'll document this." The tarp we found was in her garage, along with several other items that appear to be confiscated from various homes in the neighborhood. "We'll need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement." Over the next few days, the full scope of what Deborah had been doing came to light. The sheriff's department, working with the Division of Real Estate Investigation, had uncovered over $120,000 in missing HOA funds. Deborah had been transferring money to her personal accounts regularly, claiming the transfers were for HOA expenses. She had created fake invoices from landscaping companies, maintenance providers, and legal services. In reality, most of these vendors either didn't exist or had done minimal work. She had also been collecting fines from homeowners and pocketing the money instead of depositing it into the HOA account. The fine money alone totaled over $30,000, but the tarp theft was what really got her in the end, at least in terms of immediate criminal charges. When Deputy Morrison and his team searched her garage, they found not just my tarp, but a collection of confiscated items from around the neighborhood. There was a welcome mat with a sports team logo that apparently violated the neutral decor standards. A set of solar path lights that were the wrong color temperature. A garden flag that said "Welcome" in a font that wasn't approved. Even a doorbell camera that she had deemed unsightly. Each item represented a separate count of theft. The homeowners came forward one by one, identifying their property. Some had paid the fines and retrieval fees to get their items back. Others had just bought replacements, not wanting to deal with Deborah's harassment. I had to go to the sheriff's department to make a formal statement. I met with Deputy Morrison and a detective named Sarah Klein. They recorded my statement about both TARP incidents, the false code enforcement complaints, and everything else Deborah had done. "Mr. Jennings, your complaint really broke this case open," Detective Klein said. "We've been hearing complaints about HOA fraud for years, but most people don't follow through. You did, and that gave us the thread we needed to pull." "What's going to happen to her?" I asked. "She's being charged with multiple counts of theft, embezzlement, fraud, and filing false police reports. The district attorney is still reviewing the case, but given the amount of money involved and the number of victims, she's looking at significant prison time if convicted." The case moved surprisingly quickly. Deborah's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office wasn't interested. There were too many victims, too much money, and too much evidence. The trial was set for 4 months later. In the meantime, the court appointed a neutral party to manage the HOA's affairs. The first thing the temporary manager did was call a meeting of all homeowners to elect a proper board. The meeting was held at a local community center, and nearly every household in Pinewood Grove sent a representative. The room was buzzing with conversation as people shared their experiences with Deborah's reign of terror. Tom Richards was elected president. A retired accountant named Helen Moore became treasurer. 3 other neighbors with various professional backgrounds filled out the board. I was asked to join, but I declined. I had had enough of HOA drama. The first action of the new board was to review all outstanding fines issued by Deborah. They invalidated nearly all of them, determining that most were either bogus or grossly excessive. The second action was to change the covenant rules to be more reasonable. Navy blue tarps were officially acceptable. So were welcome mats with team logos, reasonable garden decorations, and doorbell cameras. The third action was to hire a forensic accountant to trace exactly where all the missing money had gone and to explore options for recovering it. Meanwhile, I got my tarp back. Deputy Morrison personally delivered it to me, along with a letter from the sheriff's department thanking me for my cooperation in the investigation. "You know," he said as he handed me the tarp, "this is the first time in my career that I've investigated a case where a stolen tarp led to uncovering over $100,000 in embezzlement." I laughed. "Happy to help. Will I need to testify at the trial? Probably. The DA will be in touch." The trial began on a rainy Tuesday in March. I took the day off work to attend. The courtroom was packed with homeowners from Pinewood Grove, many of whom were there to testify. Deborah looked different than I remembered. She had lost weight, and her usually perfect hair and makeup looked hastily done. She sat at the defense table next to her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. They showed bank records, fake invoices, and witness testimony. The forensic accountant testified about the money trail. Homeowners testified about the fines and confiscated property. When it was my turn, I walked through both TARP incidents, the false code enforcement complaints, and the refusal to provide financial records. The prosecutor showed the photos I had taken of Deborah with the tarp in her vehicle. "Mr. Jennings, why did you pursue this matter so aggressively?" the prosecutor asked. "At first, it was just about principle," I said. "She stole my property and acted like she had the right to do it. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized something bigger was going on. The HOA was supposed to be serving the community, but instead, it had become a tool for one person's power trip and personal enrichment." The defense tried to argue that Deborah had made accounting errors, and that the confiscated items were legitimate enforcement actions that were simply mishandled. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Deborah showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but I saw her attorney lean over and say something to her. She nodded slightly, her face pale. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Deborah was released on bail, but she had to wear an ankle monitor and was forbidden from contacting any Pinewood Grove residents. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had put her house up for sale. Nobody was surprised. The sentencing hearing was shorter than the trial. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Gomez, listened to victim impact statements from several homeowners. Tom Richards spoke about the stress and anxiety Deborah's management had caused. Helen Moore talked about elderly residents who had been bullied into paying excessive fines. I spoke about the violation of trust and the abuse of authority. Then it was Deborah's turn. Her attorney had clearly coached her. She stood and addressed the court, her voice shaking. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to the residents of Pinewood Grove. I took on the role of HOA president with good intentions, wanting to maintain our community's standards. But I lost my way. I made terrible decisions, and I deeply regret the harm I've caused." It was a carefully crafted apology that didn't really admit to anything specific. Judge Gomez saw right through it. "Miss Harrington," the judge said, her tone cold, You systematically stole from your neighbors for years. You weaponized your position to harass and intimidate people who trusted you to manage their community. You created fake companies, forged documents, and filed false police reports to cover your tracks. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, ongoing criminal enterprise. The judge sentenced Deborah to 6 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $123,000 to the HOA, plus additional restitution to individual homeowners for legal fees and other expenses. As the bailiff led Deborah away, she glanced back at the courtroom. Her eyes met mine for just a moment. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. Mostly, I felt tired. After the sentencing, several neighbors approached me in the courthouse hallway. Some thanked me for standing up to Deborah. Others apologized for not supporting the effort sooner. "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do," Tom said, shaking my hand. "Thank you." The next few months were spent rebuilding the HOA properly. The forensic accountant was able to trace most of the stolen money to various accounts Deborah controlled. The court froze those accounts, and eventually, the HOA recovered about 80% of the missing funds. Deborah's house sold quickly, despite the scandal. A young couple with 2 kids bought it. When I met them at a neighborhood barbecue the new HOA board organized, they joked about getting a discount because of the criminal history. "We Googled the address and saw all the news articles," the husband said. "But honestly, the new HOA seems great. Way better than the one in our last neighborhood." Life in Pinewood Grove gradually returned to normal. The new board focused on actual community improvement rather than enforcement. They organized yard sales, holiday parties, and a neighborhood watch program. The quarterly dues were reduced to $100 since we didn't need to fund Deborah's lifestyle anymore. I kept the navy blue tarp on my firewood. Nobody said a word about it. About a year after the trial, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Deborah, postmarked from the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on lined paper. Deborah's usually perfect penmanship was shaky. "Fletcher, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did was wrong, and I'm paying the price for it. But I wanted you to know that I do understand now how far I went off the rails. I started as HOA president wanting to help the neighborhood, to make it beautiful and prestigious. But somewhere along the way, it became about control and money and ego. I let the power go to my head. I convinced myself that I deserved the money because of all the work I was doing, that the rules I enforced were for everyone's benefit. I was wrong about everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. I just wanted you to know that what you did, standing up to me and pursuing justice, probably saved other people from my actions. If you hadn't stopped me, I would have kept going. So thank you, I suppose, for doing what was right even when it was hard." I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. 2 years after everything started, I was working in my home office when the doorbell rang. It was a delivery driver with a small package. Inside was a check for $843.67. It was my portion of the restitution recovery, representing the fines Deborah had charged me, the confiscation fee she had demanded, and a portion of the legal expenses I had incurred. The check was drawn on the Pinewood Grove HOA account and signed by Helen Moore, the treasurer. There was a note attached. "Thank you for everything you did for our community. This doesn't cover what you really contributed, but it's a start." The HOA board. I deposited the check and used the money to buy a new chainsaw. My old one had died, and I needed it to cut more firewood for the coming winter. That weekend, Tom Richards came over to help me split some logs. As we worked, he brought up the whole Deborah saga. "You ever regret going after her so hard?" he asked, tossing a split log onto the pile. I thought about it. The whole experience had been stressful and time-consuming. It had cost me money, sleep, and peace of mind, but it had also been necessary. "No," I said. "She needed to be stopped. If I hadn't done it, someone else would have eventually. Or maybe they wouldn't have, and she'd still be stealing from everyone and making people miserable." Tom nodded. "Well, for what it's worth, you've got the gratitude of 63 families, even if only half of us have told you directly." When Tom left, I covered my woodpile with the navy blue tarp, securing it carefully against the wind. It was worn now, faded slightly from 2 years of Colorado sun and weather, but it still worked perfectly. I stepped back and looked at it, remembering that morning when I had seen Deborah rolling it up, so confident in her authority and her right to take whatever she wanted. The tarp had become more than just a cover for firewood. It was a reminder that standing up to bullies and holding people accountable mattered, even when it was about something as small as a stolen tarp. Because it was never really about the tarp at all. Life moved forward. I took on new clients, enjoyed the improved neighborhood atmosphere, and eventually even agreed to join the HOA board when one of the original members moved away. I figured I had earned the right to help make sure things stayed on track. Deborah served 4 years of her sentence before being released on parole. I heard she moved to Arizona to live with her sister. She wasn't allowed to return to Colorado while on parole. The young couple who bought her house became good friends. Their kids played in the yard, and they painted their front door a cheerful yellow, which was now completely acceptable under the revised HOA covenant. Every November, when I stack my firewood for the winter and cover it with that navy blue tarp, I think about the whole crazy situation. How something so simple had unraveled years of corruption and abuse of power. How one person's refusal to be bullied had changed an entire community. I also think about all the Deborahs out there, running HOAs and other organizations with unchecked power, convinced that their authority gives them the right to do whatever they want. And I think about all the people who don't stand up to them because it seems too hard or too risky. Sometimes standing up is hard. Sometimes it costs time and money and peace of mind, but it's worth it, because communities are supposed to serve the people in them, not the other way around. And when someone forgets that, when someone steals from their neighbors and abuses their power, they need to be stopped. Even if it starts with something as simple as a stolen tarp. 3 years after everything began, Pinewood Grove HOA held its annual meeting at the community center. The new board presented the financial reports, showing healthy reserves and reasonable expenses. They discussed upcoming projects, like repaving the neighborhood entrance and updating the community sign. At the end of the meeting, Tom Richards asked me to stand up. "I want to recognize Fletcher Jennings," Tom said to the room full of neighbors. 3 years ago, Fletcher did what many of us were afraid to do. He stood up to corruption in our HOA, and because of his courage, we now have an organization that actually serves our community. "Fletcher, we all owe you a debt of gratitude." The room erupted in applause. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I also felt pride. Not in being praised, but in knowing that I had done the right thing. After the meeting, as I drove home through the neighborhood streets, I noticed something. People had their porch lights on, their holiday decorations up, their doormats and garden flags displayed without fear. The neighborhood felt alive and welcoming in a way it never had under Deborah's regime. One house had a bright purple door. Another had solar lights lining their driveway in rainbow colors. A third had a huge inflatable snowman in the front yard that was definitely not in keeping with community aesthetic standards. And nobody cared. Because we had learned that communities thrive on diversity and personality, not rigid conformity enforced by petty tyranny. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house. It was just a regular house in a regular neighborhood. But it was mine, and I had defended my right to live in it without harassment. The navy blue tarp was visible from my driveway, covering the firewood stack in the backyard. It was still doing its job, keeping the wood dry and ready for burning. I had won a victory that extended far beyond one person or one neighborhood. I had proven that ordinary citizens could hold their leaders accountable, that bullies could be stopped, and that justice could prevail. All because I refused to let someone steal my tarp and get away with it. The story of the HOA Karen who stole my firewood tarp and froze when she saw the sheriff's department seal became something of a legend in Boulder Creek. Other HOAs in the area heard about it and started implementing better oversight and accountability measures. The Division of Real Estate used our case as an example in their training materials. And me. I went back to my quiet life, working from home, cutting firewood, and occasionally attending HOA board meetings to make sure we stayed on the right track. But I never forgot the lessons I learned. Stand up for yourself. Document everything. Don't let bullies intimidate you. And sometimes, the smallest act of theft can unravel the biggest criminal enterprise. The tarp still covers my firewood every winter. It's more than just a tarp now. It's a symbol of resistance, accountability, and the power of one person to make a difference. And it's still navy blue, which I maintain is absolutely an earth tone. Nobody argues with me about it anymore.